my name is Ann Kent. I'm the owner of Peas and Happiness, and today we're going to talk about pumpkins. Halloween is on Saturday, and so I wanted to share a couple of pumpkins with you and talk about the differences between the two. And then actually also show you how you can roast your own pumpkin from scratch and talk a little bit about how you might use that. So first, let's talk about the difference between these two pumpkins. So obviously the clearest difference is the size, and that actually tells you a lot about the pumpkins. So the bigger the pumpkin, the better it is going to be for carving. The bigger pumpkins typically have less flesh. They have more open inside, which makes them really good for carving, but not as good for eating. They do still have really tasty seeds inside, so if you want to make those savory roasted pumpkin seeds, you still could use those if you're going to carve a pumpkin. But otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily recommend to carve these types of pumpkins. You can if you want, but they're just going to be a little bit stringy, not quite as flavorful, and quite as delicious. So we're going to set that one aside. Alternatively, this smaller pumpkin, what you can look for in the grocery store would be a pie pumpkin or a sugar pumpkin. Those are going to be sweeter and they're going to have more flesh in them, especially for the size of what they are. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this open and show you what this looks like. If you want to roast your own pumpkin, you're going to start out the same way that you would do if you were carving a pumpkin, and you're just going to cut out the stem first of all. So I'm just going to use this large knife and really carefully cut around this. And of course, once you cut all the way around it, then you can really easily pull this out. So we're going to discard this part of the pumpkin. The stem is not really good for anything, but you're going to pull that out just like you would if you were carving your pumpkin. And now you can see we've got the insides, and you can see how they are a little bit more thick than you might be used to with a carving pumpkin. So step number 2, we're going to cut this in half lengthwise. I just sharpened my knife before doing this, and I would highly recommend that because these pumpkins are big. I didn't quite cut all the way through. I'm just going to break the bottom half of that. Okay, now this part, you can actually save these seeds on the inside. You can see that they're nice and big, and if you do want to roast those, this is what they look like once they're roasted. Those are just some savory roasted seeds. They're really easy to do. Just toss them with some oil and your favorite seasoning. I actually just use a seasoned salt, so it was really, really easy. But as you scrape these out, you will have to use just a little bit of muscle. So this is not like a cantaloupe or something that's really, really soft. It's more like a butternut squash that you actually have to do a bit of work to get those seeds out. So I'm going to set them aside in this bowl, and then later you can pull apart the pumpkins from the stringy innards. So those innards are not going to be good to eat. That's why we're taking all of this out before we roast it. So scrape out as much of that stringy part as you can. Those are not good. That stringy part is not going to be as tasty, and the texture will be not as pleasant. So I definitely would recommend to scrape out as much as possible. Again, using just a little bit of muscle to get that out. Okay, but save all of it because the seeds are for sure worth it. They're nice and tasty, they're really healthy. Okay, so once you've done that, you can either roast each of these halves as they are. You can put them in a baking dish and just put them straight into the oven at 400 degrees. It takes about 45 minutes, more or less, depending on how big your pumpkin is, how thick it is, and also how hot your oven typically cooks. So I would recommend to pull them out after about 30 minutes, test it with a fork, just insert it into the flesh. If it's still pretty solid, then you want to put it back in the oven. You'll want to cook this until it's really, really soft. And then once the flesh is soft, you'll take your spoon, and it'll be really, really easy at this point to scoop that flesh out of the shell. So once you've got the flesh out of the shell, then you can use this just as you would canned pumpkin. Keep in mind that it is going to be a little bit more stringy, so if you don't appreciate that texture, you might want to do something like food process it just for a little bit, and that'll help break down some of those fibers. But otherwise, I will drop a couple of links of different ways that you can use pumpkin. So for example, I have a pumpkin porridge that's really delicious with using steel cut oats and pumpkin. You could also even make your own pumpkin spice latte at home. That was on the Peas and Happy meal guides a couple weeks ago. So I used homemade or home roasted pumpkin from that because I couldn't find any in the store. So It's really, really simple to do this. So if you want to be a little bit adventuresome this fall, you can use these pumpkins after they've been sitting out as decorations. So this guy has been on my shelf for about a month and a half. They do last quite a while, so if in a couple weeks, once the pumpkin starts to get soft, you definitely need to use it or it's time to throw it away. So I'll post a picture of the final product of our roasted pumpkin, but otherwise I hope you enjoy and have a wonderful Halloween this weekend. Take care, everybody.